G'day mateys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into tonight's creepy story, make sure you grab yourself your favourite bevy, sit back, relax and enjoy. Last night, I barely got away with my life. It all started when Carl called me yesterday morning and wanted me to come with him to the mall since he wanted to hang out and maybe play some Magic: The Gathering. I got there bringing my commander deck, expecting our regular pod. But when I got there, it was just him. However, we still played. Hey man, I want to talk about last night and if you're still willing to go to the hospital. Carl spoke in a low, somber tone. Hell yeah, I'm curious why I forgot such simple events like the closet, or I vaguely remember a basement, I said with enthusiasm. Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure you're willing to do this. The reason why I mention this is because I had a strange dream involving the hospital, he said, looking down at his hands and fidgeting. What was the dream, man? Are you okay? I asked. Yeah, just some weird shit, to be honest. I woke up in the hospital and was sitting next to my mother, who was asleep. This wasn't the strange part. The strange part is my mother was strapped down and covered in bandages. I was curious about my dream, so I slowly unravelled them. And the more I removed, the more my mother screamed in pain. I got to the point where I can see skin, but nothing was there, and it was all muscle and blood. She was skinned alive, and I was causing her pain. So I dropped the bandages and stepped back in shock. I looked at my hands, and they were covered in blood when they weren't before. When I looked back at my mother, I noticed the bandages weren't there, and her skin was on the floor where I placed the bandages. Travis, I skinned my mother alive in a dream and only felt fear. I know it's a dream, but fuck. Carl was running his fingers through his hair and breathing heavily. I stood up and gave him a small hug. It's okay, man. It was just a dream. I'm certain you would never intentionally harm your mother like that, I said, reassuring him with a soft tone. I then let go and sat back down and waited for him to speak. He looked up and asked, Do you think she'd be alive if I wasn't? He said with a tear in his eye. Hey man, her death wasn't your fault. She had terminal cancer and was in massive pain. It's okay to feel this way, but it wasn't your fault. I know, it just sometimes feels like it was my fault. He spoke while clearing his throat. We sat there and spoke about this for a bit. I was trying to calm him down since he was usually more stable than I am. However, since his mother passed, he hasn't been the same. We talked about this before, but I haven't seen him this down in a long time. Are you sure you're okay with going there? We don't have to, I said calmly. No, we should. I was only down because of the dream. It was more than likely that just being there reminded me of my mother, he said, cheering up. Okay, good. Then here's the plan, I said with excitement. We went over the plan to get back into the hospital. This time, the gardener wasn't going to be there, so we can go there earlier and explore it longer during the daytime. I even found a blueprint at the local county clerk's office. I pointed out how there was a basement and a door that leads somewhere that isn't on the blueprint, which was strange, but I threw it out as a potential oversight by the local government. After we got the plan made out, we headed home and we got our things ready. Later that day, we arrived at the hospital and jumped the wall as usual. It was a warm day, roughly 75 degrees, maybe 80. But when we got into the hospital, the temperature dropped drastically. At the time, we shrugged it off as the place having superb insulation. We entered the cafeteria again and sat down to speak about the basement and how to get there. Looks like it's about 30 feet out this door and to the left, right next to the freezer, I said. Okay, let's do it, Carl said with enthusiasm. We high-fived quietly and got up to walk into the kitchen. When we got there, the kitchen was smaller than I thought it would be. I felt cramped and claustrophobia was setting in a little. However, I was able to swallow down my fear for the time being. As we got to the freezer, we heard a noise. It was the freezer whirring up, but it did scare us both into thinking someone was in the room with us. Not sure why this place still had power. We got curious and opened the freezer. This freezer was almost the size of my whole apartment. The outside of the fridge was locked with a massive padlock. The smell of rust was in the air, despite the area being rather clean. And there isn't much rust in the area. Carl brought a pair of bolt cutters in case the basement door was padlocked, but our curiosity was overflowing when we saw this. You tell me, how odd is it an abandoned hospital that still has power and has its fridge still running? What do they need to store there? Well, we found out, and I wish we didn't. Okay man, I'll snip this open. Pull out your taser just in case, Carl said, slightly sweating from anxiety. I pulled the taser out, waiting to make sure something wouldn't come at us. I couldn't get the weird dream I had last time out of my head. The thing chasing me seemed so familiar. The whole scene is replaying through my head over and over again. It took the sound of the lock breaking and snapped me out of my daze. Then it hit me. The smell of death permeated the room, making Carl and I vomit in reaction to the smell. When we regained our composure, we looked inside the fridge, and the floor was covered in dry blood. It was too cold for maggots to infest, but I'm sure they would if they could. It seemed to be a meat storage locker, with slabs of meat wrapped in thick, opaque plastic, making it hard to see the contents. I walked to one and tapped on one. Frozen solid. I wonder what is in these. Could be pig or maybe cow, I said, laughing lightheartedly. Shit, let's open one up then. The place is abandoned and this shit has been sitting here just rotting away, Carl said, laughing slightly. He then pulls out a knife and slowly cuts down the plastic. It's very thick plastic wrapping, so it takes a few cuts to get through. He opens it up and immediately we started to panic. Inside the plastic was a naked female body. Her insides were scooped out and her chest was ripped open, showing bare ribs and spine. Whoever did this removed her head and removed all the limbs. This person was butchered. Carl, what the fuck is going on? What did we stumble into? I said while panicking and breathing heavily. I don't fucking know, but we have to leave now, Carl said, picking up the knife and running out. I started to follow him, and we were trying to focus only on running out. I was flooded by a memory of a man with a gas mask holding a knife and walking toward me with extreme malice and humming a song. I tried to focus on what the song was, but I couldn't remember it. The man reached down and grabbed me by the back of my neck, pushing me onto the cold concrete. Then, the feeling of warm liquid was running down my back. The shock felt so real, I tried to scream, but all I could hear was him say, "Tag, you're it!" Hey man, wake the fuck up! We gotta go! Carl screamed while shaking me back and forth. Fuck, fuck, fuck! I screamed while trying to catch up. We left out the front door and sighed a sigh of relief. We then looked around and the groundkeeper was outside looking at us. Hey, you kids aren't supposed to be here! What are y'all doing here? He shouted to us. The sound of his lawnmower was burying the sound of his voice, so it took him a couple of times. But while he was approaching us, we can see him pulling something out of his back pocket, and we just ran. We climbed the wall quicker than ever before, but it hit me. I felt 3 loud claps and my leg was on fire. I fell over the other side and felt the same hot liquid pouring from my leg. The pain didn't register until I was in the car. I was shot in the leg by the man. Carl was freaking out as he drove me to the hospital. The police were called and questioned me after my surgery to pull the bullet out. Son, what happened to you exactly? The cop asked in a calm, caring tone. My friend and I went to explore the abandoned hospital at the edge of town, since it was a place I used to frequent often. We then went to the basement and found bodies in the fridge. We freaked out and ran. When we got outside, the groundskeeper chased me and then shot me in the leg. I was shaking at this point and worrying I would get into trouble. Son, you decided to jump into the old Mercy Point hospital and found bodies in the basement? It's hard to believe this is true. Also, who is your friend? He asked, looking into my eyes in confusion. The guy who drove me here and checked me in. His name is Carl Simmons. He's been my friend for years, I said. Son, you are the only one here. We looked at the cameras and you seemed to be talking to yourself. I could have sworn Carl took me here and helped me check in. He was there. He's real. The cops tell me they sent someone out there shortly after and no bodies, or even hints of bodies were there. After the cops left, they bought me my laptop, and here I am now, still recovering. I have to know who helped me and why I was shot. The cops told me I was trespassing, and he had the right to consider it was his property. I have to go back. I have to find out what happened there. If they won't, guys, please pray for me. I may not come back next time.